Today, we are privileged to have with us at the University of Washington, Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. As a triplet born in a traditional Swiss family, Elisabeth's formative challenge was her struggle for individual identity. Elisabeth's views on child development, parenting, and psychotherapy have been enriched by her experience as the mother of 2 children. Elisabeth appreciates children as teachers. She has developed tools for helping us understand the symbolic language of children and their need for unconditional love. Elisabeth advocates that children be fully respected as individuals. She supports their right to experience and express their natural feelings about living and dying.
We saw two interviews with 2 families who have a potentially terminally ill child. And then we had our interview on more issues of ethical, moral, spiritual issues. Can you ask us parents or potential parents or parents-to-be or whatever you are, some of the questions that you have regarding children and death? Most people say they can face the death of a grown-up better than of a child, and isn't it depressing working with dying children all the time? I find working with dying children much, much, much easier than with adults. For many reasons. For a young mother who has 5 children, dying is terribly difficult because she has to leave her children. Well, a child doesn't have all the obligations, the social kind of family responsibilities and obligations. I think that's one part of it. But the most important part when you deal with dying children is that they check you out. And if you are honest and can hear when they say, I want to play now, meaning I don't want to talk about illness or dying, and you then go back and play with them and respect that, they really love you. And then when you least expect it, they pull you aside and start talking about dying. For 2 minutes, they ask you a question, like, what is it like? Or do you think I'm going to be around at Christmas? And you answer honestly whatever comes out, and then they go back to play again. It's much less heavy, it's much more directly, it's much more honest, and it's not like a drawn-out thing like you have with grown-ups. The thing we, I think, neglected a bit so far is the big problems that siblings have. And the siblings and grandparents, I think, are the 2 groups of people that we have to pay more attention to. I see siblings, almost exclusively siblings, end up with having physical problems when you have a terminally ill child. And my favorite example is a little boy who had cancer up in the Bay Area. And I had him draw a picture, and both parents drew a picture, and the brother drew a picture, and everybody was in good shape except the brother, who must have been about 7 or 8 years old. He had a very pathetic, sad, horrible picture. And I looked at it and I knew that I had to do something with this child alone, because he always sat on the side, kind of away from the rest of the family, and all the attention was focused on the child with cancer, who was in a good shape at that time, physically and emotionally. And when I finished my house call, I said to him, I want you to walk me to the car. And his immediate reaction was, who? Me? And that already tells you a lot, because what he says, who am I? I'm not important. And I said, I want you to come alone. With the emphasis alone, we need some private space together. You don't have to say all these things. I just said, yes, you. And he comes out, and the moment he closed the door behind him, he grabbed my hand. And he looked at me and I said, I guess you know I have asthma. And I blurted it out, and I say things before I think usually, get into a lot of troubles because of that. And I said to him, that doesn't surprise me. And he looked at me very seriously and I said, I guess that's not good enough. And I said, not good enough? Why should you say that? I don't know if you know that asthma and pulmonary problems are strongly a contributing factor is repressed grief. That's why I said it doesn't surprise me. And he said, that's not good enough. And I said to him, now, why should you say that? And he said, well, my brother gets everything. He can go to Disneyland, he gets electric train sets, he gets anything he wants, And the other day I asked my dad for a football, and my dad became very angry and said, "You can't have it." And this guy had enough, and that's what I call natural anger, to say, "How come?" It takes 15 seconds, but he dared to say it. That means he still has a good prognosis. And the father said, very angry, would you rather have cancer? And a lot of parents do that. And what they mean is, look, this poor brother of yours has cancer, so at least he can get some toys and goodies while he's around. You understand? I understand their thinking, but to a child who takes everything literally, that means if you're very sick, you get some toys. If you're dreadfully sick, you get lots of toys. And if you're healthy, keep quiet and be grateful. And children can cope with that. And this child already developed asthma. And if nobody helps him now before his brother dies, this is a guy who later on, when he's married, every time he wants something from his wife, he gets sick. Do you understand? He will use psychosomatic defenses and illnesses to get attention, because he learned at a young age that if you get sick, then you're entitled to attention. And that, to me, to know that is preventive psychiatry and preventive medicine. And it's very important that we help those brothers and sisters. You saw the little boy in the interview. He was beautiful at the end. When we wanted to finish the interview, he said, "Hey, wait a minute, I need to say something." Meaning, you left me out, you haven't asked me a question, and I think that's delightful. If you can hear that, even if it's no longer on the air, that means that's his natural anger and beginning of assertiveness and self-trust and inner authority. And that's why it's so important that children learn to say, "Hey, don't leave me out," and then not get bashed or reprimanded or say, "Don't be a piggy, that's not your turn now." That, to me, is the most important. And you see how grandmas are important and grandpas in this interview? They have a double loss because they go through the pain of their own children, and they also lose a grandchild, and we never kind of appreciate that this is really a double loss. Do you have any questions you want to ask?
Elisabeth, I wanted to ask a question about children who go through a death experience that's really how can I say, a very dramatic death experience. Some of the people I work with have witnessed children getting blown up by grenades and by bombs, and they come and talk to me about how that's impacted on them. And I wondered if you could talk or address that issue.
You're talking about the Vietnamese?
Yes.
Tragedy, yeah.
Perhaps you could repeat his question for...
Well, he's talking about children who have witnessed very dramatic and traumatic and violent deaths, like children who were blown up in Vietnam. And we have had lots of children, Lebanese children, and I'm seeing children in Lebanon, Beirut, and Israel. I see them because they're terminally ill, but they bring in a whole different dimension of issues that we never think about in the United States. I had one little boy whose mother was Egyptian and the father was Lebanese, and they were separated. And he said to me that he's dying very soon, and the big problem for him was whether he should go back home to his beloved dad. But then every so often he has to go into a ditch, and everybody left and right gets killed and blown up. And he literally chose whether he should be blown up in a sudden death or should stay with his mom in Egypt, where he will die a slow, lingering death. And he asked me very concretely, which one would you prefer? And I said he should not choose which way he's going to die, but where is he more comfortable to live with his mom or with his dad? And then he talked about the conflicts, because each time he leaves mom, she's heartbroken, and then he feels guilty about leaving mom. Then when he leaves dad, then he feels that tomorrow he may be blown up, and that's the last time I would be able to see him. Those are children, you know, grow up into adults overnight, and we think we have problems with our children. They have horrendous problems.
You mentioned once before that children do not, the horrendous deaths, let's say children being eaten by sharks, and the experience that, like I was thinking of some of the boat people who...
The actual deaths of these children is, I think, what you're trying to ask.
Yes.
We found that when we have worked with murdered children, especially brutalized children, who may have been raped before and then killed, what is the most tragic aspect for parents is to get face to face with what actually happened between the disappearance of my child and they were actually dead. The torture and the nightmare and the prolonged suffering and sadistic experiences they were exposed to. And we found out that children, the younger the children, the easier it is when a child is traumatized, victimized in whatever form or tortured, they have the ability to step out of their physical body very quickly, like the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. This is not experience that you only have at the moment of the actual death. You can have this many times before. And in fact, a lot of people have this many times before. If a child, the child that was eaten up by sharks, the mother would have gone insane to think that bits by bits the sharks eat my little girl up. And the only thing that was left was a hand with a dime store ring on it. That's how it was identifiable. And I told the mother, I said, your child, the moment this happened, simply stepped out of her physical body. That's why God created us this way. The soul cannot be eaten up by a shark. The butterfly can never be damaged. You just step out of the cocoon. And that is very much true of victimized, of raped children and children who are tortured. And we have verified that with the drawings, because many times when a child dies suddenly in a violent kind of death or murdered children, we always ask the parents to bring their drawings that they found of the last few weeks or days. And this child had, the last drawing she drew was a rainbow in form of an ocean wave, and the little girl sat under the ocean wave. And that really helped the mother. In one of our last workshops, we had a grown-up, a nurse who worked in an emergency room, and they told her that she had to leave her work as a nurse. She was no longer capable of doing it because she showed a very peculiar behavior. Each time somebody screamed, she went into what they considered a catatonic stupor. She would hide under a table and be totally unreachable, like a zombie, just totally not there. So we took her into our workshop to find out what causes this behavior. And while somebody was screaming out their own agony, she was in the back of the room and went under a table and stayed there for 8 hours. Not moving, nothing. And one of my people said she's in a catatonic stupor and we really should get her to hospital. And I went to see her and sat on the floor watching her. And I noticed that this woman is as little catatonic as any of you in this room. She was simply out of her body. And I said, come back into your body, I want to talk to you. And I didn't even say that loud. I just thought that, because if she's out of her body, she's aware of my thoughts. And if she's in her body, she would not respond, because when you're in your body, usually people are not mind readers, right? And within a second, she was fully awake and looked at me, and I said, you're taking off, and I want to find out why you take off. And I asked somebody next to me to scream, and in a split second, she was out of her body. And so we took her into a back room, and one of my employees, who loves to scream at me with permission, I said to her, you and I are going to really scream and sound as mean as we can do it. And I told her the only thing she had to do is to find her own inner authority, that there are other ways of coping with the old traumas and to take off. And all she needed to do is to whisper, stop. And I promised that I would stop fighting. And so Sheila and I scream at each other, and in a split second, she's gone again. And then I had to bring her back in again. The third time, I said, you're going to say stop and learn that you can stop this behavior. And we just started screaming, and she whispered, barely audible, stop. And we stopped, and she laughed, and she had this incredible relief. And what she then was able to share is that she was sexually abused all her childhood. I mean, in horrible ways. And the only way she literally survived without losing her sanity and her life was to take off. And it was done in a very violent environment with a lot of screaming. And then when she became a nurse, she did marvelous until she was sent to the emergency room. And when people were brought in screaming, she could no longer function. And that is something that you can verify with people. And you have people who are stuck then in that old behavior and end up, I'm sure, many of them in psychiatric hospitals. And it's very important that when you become aware of the physical and psychic energy and the differences, how those energies feel, a good neurologist, for example, or an emergency room physician and nurse should instantly know whether somebody's in or out of their body. Because if they're out of the body in a deep coma and they're very near death, you can literally ask those patients, those children, if it's okay to work on them and try to get them back in and okay. And then you can use all life-prolonging procedures. But when you see somebody who is already gone, you know, then there's absolutely no purpose in adding all this agony and procedure. When you get rid of your unfinished business, you become aware of energy. And you begin to be aware, and you hopefully listen to people, children especially have been in comas for weeks, and that you talk to them, that you think loving thoughts in their presence, and that you touch them. And then when they come out of the coma, they say, you were the only one who always said good morning to me. It's a very touching experience. And I think they're again here to teach us that, you know, as long as you're in your physical body, you will go in and out of the physical body, and they can teach us what we can do for them, if you're humble enough to believe that, I guess.
What about adults or young adults who are depressed? Does that really have its roots in childhood? Does depression seem to have its roots in childhood?
You cannot generalize depressions like you cannot generalize suicides. There are thousands and thousands of young children who commit suicide, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, and I see lots of them. Young adults, teenagers, a lot of my suicidal teenagers are non-diagnosed manic depressives, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a clearly biochemical disorder. And if in doubt, I would always recommend that if you have a young adult, late teenager, young adult, in a very deep depression, in case of doubt, give them a trial lithium treatment. It's the only drugs that I really endorse because it keeps the lid on the depth of the depression. They're still aware of their depression, but they don't get into the depth where they kill themselves. And then check out the families if there are other manic depressives in the family. We can save thousands of lives by diagnosing manic depressive illness earlier before they have killed themselves. That is a class all by itself. A lot of my children who commit suicide, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, literally commit suicide because they cannot fulfill the parental expectations. I use my favorite example of the 10-year-old who came home with 2 back grades. And he was devastated and heartbroken, and nobody talked to him. Why do you come home from school so devastated? Everybody was busy. And the father's expectation is that nobody comes to the dining room table unless you're in a good mood. We don't like long faces at the dining room table. So not out of love and compassion, but out of his expectation, he confronts this 10-year-old boy and says, "What's the matter with you?" Well, if you ask a devastated 10-year-old in this way, that does not help to share pain. That just intimidates you more. But this guy confessed to his father that he came home with 2 back grades. Nobody asked him, how come 2 back grades? Which classes you made back grades? Are you getting sick? Maybe you don't get enough sleep. Maybe we need to talk to a teacher or give you different assignments. Nobody asked about the whys. The father's immediate reaction, and that reflects that this is his unfinished business, says, if you don't care, we don't care. And he ordered the family not to look at him during the meal. I don't know if you can conceive what the horrible punishment this is for a 10-year-old who is already devastated, knowing that I cannot live up to my parents' expectation, than to be punished by total rejection, not to look at him. There are 5 children, and nobody was allowed to look at him during the meal. He couldn't eat his dinner. He tried to swallow it. After the meal, he apparently went to bed. And at night, I think 8, 9 o'clock, when her mother tucked the other 5 children into bed, she decided that she has to teach her son a lesson. And she decided to skip his room. And so she skips the room. I imagine that this child was waiting and praying and hoping that somebody comes to share some of his pain. But her idea was, this is to teach him a lesson. And nobody talked him in, nobody said goodnight. He was a reject. And that's how they feel it. And at 6 in the morning, he shot himself. And he's dead. And he's not dead because of 2 C's. He's dead because the implication is, I love you if you bring good grades home. And that means otherwise you're not lovable. And nobody can live without love. I mean, it's not possible. And I think that kind of conditional love is the cause of a tremendous number of kids who commit suicide. And then naturally they would go into drugs or alcohol or promiscuity under the illusion that this is love. But we create, not in all of them I must say, but we create many times the roots of the problems. And the other group of children, 25% of all my children in the United States that we are working with when they are grown-ups with unfinished business have been sexually or physically abused. 25%. Well, where in the world do you have a safe place where you can say, my father abused you? My grandfather had sex with me between age 6 and 12. Where is a place where he can go and say that and be safe and get help? There are no places, really. And so they swallow it down, and then they become grown-ups, and then they have tremendous interpersonal relationships. And sooner or later, it's going to backfire. And then they fall in love with somebody, and they can't get close to him, and they commit suicide. They put onto them the punishment and the guilt and the shame and the impotent rage and everything. But they're preventable. And my big dream is that instead of that stupid IQ that we give to our children, that IQ test, you know, to see if they're super brains or a little dumb, it gives the children already a stamp that stays with them. It's already a form of discrimination. Instead of doing that, I would ask every child when they enter kindergarten or first grade to do a picture and deal with the unfinished business they present in a picture. And children's workshops, you know, we do the same thing for children that we do with grown-ups. Children take 1 day, what takes grown-ups 5 days. So imagine it takes very little time. You can do a class of 70 kids in 1 day. And they're even finished an hour before the actual finishing time. And then we just play. And if you could do that, you could get rid of the old unfinished hurts. And you could help those who offend our children. Not judge or punishment, but help them to understand that you only beat children if you have been beaten. And you abuse children if you have not been raised in a natural psychosexual development. And that's ill health. And ill health people you don't punish, you help them to get well again. And then you can take the children back to the families. Or very often you can do it simultaneously. You don't even have to take the children away. And that is my dream. And then I would repeat it in 3rd grade, maybe one more time in high school. And we wouldn't need any psychiatrists. Wouldn't that be nice? we would need a few for, you know, the manic depressives and the psychotics. But they could do real psychiatry and help those people who need help badly. But preventive medicine, preventive psychology, preventive criminology has to start in 1st grade. Because you get all your basic attitudes between age 1 and 6. You'll be stamped for life how you were helped or not helped between age 1 and 6. That's the most crucial, important times of your life. The beauty, and I have to bring up God again, the way God created man is to me absolute miracle, because any damage that is done to you is repairable. I think that's terrific. I've had a woman who's 100 years and 4 months old who came to my workshop. And she finished her unfinished business and dies 2 weeks later. I mean, that to me is flexibility. Human beings are created in such an incredible way. I think that's just glorious. But you also understand that if you help children early, before it's suppressed and repressed for 50 or 70 or 90 years, it comes out much easier. And then they have that many more years to live a whole healthy life and also raise their own children in a much healthier way. Who else has a...
In the last hour, you spoke of the rights of parents to care for their kids in the way that they see fit. Where, and I hear you now talking about there is such a thing as parental abuse of children. Where do you draw the line between abuse and the right of parents to care for their children the way they want to? Are you making the distinction between intervention as opposed to taking the child away from the parents?
I think if ever humanly possible, I would not take a child away from the parents. I think even a semi-good or half-rotten mother is better than shipping a child from foster home to foster home. And if you can help the parents lovingly, not judgmentally, it takes terribly little time to help a mother be capable of not passing on her negativity to a child. We have 80, 85 people in a workshop. It takes 5 days. And between 82 and 92% of those grown-ups have a positive permanent life change in 5 days. I do not believe that they need years and years of psychotherapy. And by then the damage is done and the children are ruined. If you really work with the actual issue and not spend lots of time, case histories and whatnot, but get to the issue and find out where it comes from. And take the weeds out with the roots, not chop off 1/10 of an inch every week in 2-hour sessions. You can really bring about dramatic changes in a short time. That is my hope. I think psychiatry has to change to be more practical and less expensive. And that's it. This help has to be available to any human being, whether they can afford it or not. And we need to train more people how to do that. There are a few who are not available for this kind of work. There are 1 or 2 for whom it's too heavy and too traumatic. And they will come a year later or 2 years later. But that's again something, it has to be your free choice. But you also then have to accept the consequences of your choices. If I had abusing grown-ups, I would offer them help to come to such a very intense hard labor work, or have their children removed until they have resolved it. And I think most people would be happy to get help in a loving, non-judgmental way and keep the children. And then make the rest of the family aware of the abuse, because many times they either use denial or close their eyes. And if it's a publicly known thing, the children would be protected. Do you have any other questions about children and death, mainly?
How do you help parents who have lost a child unexpectedly and who might have some guilt about the loss?
In our workshops, we use the guilt by... We help guilt issues by offering a safe, again, loving, non-judgmental environment where whoever is guilty about anything, whether it's imagined or real, shares their guilt and all the things that they didn't do and could have done and should have done. And if they share it, it's like a public confession. Very hard to do and painful. And if it comes from here, not from here, it's followed by a lot of grieving and tears, and you should always cry with a noise to really let it come out, not to swallow it back in. And once you have been able to do that, all you need to do is to forgive yourself. The moment you forgive yourself, you're forgiven. And if you have 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 people who share their guilt, it's a very contagious and very moving experience. And the love and the compassion that you get for having had the courage to do that is more than compensation for the pain to get it out. I think you need to do that. Yeah.
Could you comment on the hospice concept and children's hospice?
We have had lots of hospices coming up in the last few years. I think sometimes we had too many hospices come up. Many hospices come up like chicken delight in the last year or two, and I have to say that because just by giving a place the name hospice does not mean yet that it's really a hospice. A hospice is a very loving place with hand-picked staff who have no unfinished business about the issues of death and dying, who have resolved their own unshed tears or their own unresolved griefs, and who are willing to say no thank you to any treatments that have a tendency to prolong life, that give you that holistic kind of loving care and take care of your physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual quadrant, with not the goal to prolong life, but to help you to live fully and as whole as you can until you die. And this emphasized on home care whenever, if ever humanly possible, and really requires a few beds for those who do not have a family, or when you have a dying child. There is a point where you just cannot be with a child 24 hours a day and at the same time be fair to your husband or your other children. And those families need a hospice where they can bring a child for a week to get a vacation. I'm calling it a vacation. It's not really a vacation, but where they can switch gears and recuperate and get strength again, and then they're again loving and caring 24 hours a day. And we discovered that the hospices, especially lately when I think it has to do with politics and money, so many new hospices are coming up, and they're really not prepared for it, that there is a very, very small percentage of hospices that are willing to take children. If I'm not, I think I'm correct by saying that less than 10% of all hospices take children. And parents of children who are ill over years need a place to be able to put them there. They also have refused to take AIDS patients. And hospices should be places of unconditional love. And because we have troubles finding hospice care, and I mean in-service care now especially, for our children, and especially abused children, physically beaten children, what you call a battered child syndrome children, where a father beats the child up and comes into the hospital every year with broken bones and broken skulls and broken clavicle and whatnot. And this child had leukemia. And we could not send this child back home into this family because we knew that he would come back with broken bones again. And we couldn't find a hospice for this child. And to me, that's very heartbreaking. And as a result of it, we formed the Children's Hospice International in Virginia 2 months ago. And we are having seminars and conventions and try to get funding solicited to help any good hospice and help them and encourage them to take children. And also as a mutual exchange of ideas and of support system. So if anybody is interested in a Children's Hospice International, I will leave the address here. It was started by a woman who was at my workshop 5 years ago, and at the end of the workshop she said, I don't know why I was in this workshop. And impulsive as I am, I said to her, in 5 years you will know. And I said that just on top of my head. And 5 years later to the day, she calls up and she said, I know why I was in a workshop 5 years ago. My friend had a child and she got to run around and she never found a hospice, and I'm going to start the children's hospice. So we started it, and it's really going beautiful. We also, I think I forgot to mention, that try to take all our patients home to die. We very, very much hope that future physicians consider that as alternative number one. And that has to come at a time when all our science of medicine has depleted their resources, and we really, all we can do if we are honest with ourselves is to keep a child comfortable, but not add any more chemotherapy or life-prolonging procedures, We usually ask the parents if they're ready to be willing to take a child home. And there are some very peculiar philosophies come up that you have to not judge but understand. A lot of parents say, I would love to take my honey home, but my relatives and my parents or my in-laws say that is almost sacrilegious. You don't do that. That means you give up hope. And they make them guilty for taking a child home, implying that you are giving up and the child will pick that up and then he will certainly die. And those are kind of almost superstitions that you have to deal with those who make the parents guilty. And if you try to help those families, and always have a support system ready of at least 2 people. A single mother alone cannot take care of a dying child. But you have to have some time to breathe. You have to have some time to go to a hairdresser. A father has to be allowed to go bowling once a week, or whatever he used to do in order to continue to live his own life. Because if you're always there when that child dies, it's such a vacuum that the repercussions are enormous. And if you have 2 people who can alternate, and that you tell a mother it's okay to go to a hairdresser and to look pretty, or a teenager whose brother is dying, by golly, you have to go to the dance. You should dance, you should giggle, you should sing, you should not live in a morgue because your brother is dying. And I think some of us have to explicitly say that to siblings and to parents. Otherwise they feel like the fear of what others think of you is one of the biggest fears in our society. And you have to get rid of that. And remember, other people's opinion of you is their problem. My favorite saying, it helped me a lot. What other questions do you have?
I've taken care of children who've lost limbs to bone tumors. Do you see similarities between the loss of a limb and death itself?
Yes. Any loss is dealt with basically the same. I've had lots of parents who expected a healthy baby and then they have a blind child. They go through all the stages of dying. If a child loses her hair, they may go through all the stages of dying. If you lose a limb, that's even more permanent. You go through the denial and the shock and the anger and the bargain and the depression. And then they recuperate and learn how to live with it. And then suddenly they have tumor somewhere else. And it starts all over. It's very difficult. Handicapped children, chronically handicapped children, go through the stages 100 times sometimes. And people do not appreciate that. It's harder sometimes to be a handicapped child, to have to live with it, than to have a terminal illness that ends in a year. Because it's a drawn-out, hopes up, hope down, up and down. Like people have multiple sclerosis or lupus, those unpredictable ones. They think they really made it, they're okay, and the next day they're blind. And then they have their vision again, and the next time they're paralyzed. Then they finally get the job again and they're able to function, something else comes. They go through all the stages all over. We have to have more compassion and understanding for those who have handicaps and problems or lose their sight or their limbs. They are living, but they have gone through a death experience. And every time there is a reoccurrence of whatever symptoms, it starts over again. And I can't say you never get used to it. There are people who have gone through lots and lots of windstorms in life. You will see that they have the most incredible serenity and equanimity. And you never see anger, you never see grief, you never see bargaining, you never see depression. But those are diamonds who have been in a tumbler 10,000 times. And the diamond is now so polished that there are no more rough edges. My black cleaning woman was one of those diamonds, my first teacher, who has gone through all the tumblers of life, and she was one of my best teachers. But their life history is very classical, having gone through many, many losses like this. to help people to die with dignity, I hope you know, does not mean to die with peace and acceptance. It means to be allowed to die in character. And that's very important for those of you who work with teenagers. Teenagers who are especially in a rebellious, angry stage, and they feel cheated and had and angry at God and the world and mom and dad. And then they're told they have acute leukemia and they have 2 weeks to live. And boy, are they angry. And then to give them Valium or sweet talk or sugar-coated sweetness and try desperately to get them to a stage of acceptance, that is a projection of your needs. And that is not love. That is manipulation. And I take them out and say, let's get that anger out. I would be so mad. And I use an ugly language, and we go to the lake, and we throw rocks in the lake. That's before I knew about the rubber hose. At Larrabee, the Children's Hospital, we went to the lake, and we threw the rocks in the water, and I had marvelous experiences. And they love you for it. And then sometimes in the last moment, they reach that serenity anyway. But don't expect it. Just accept them where they are at. And it scares the staff, and it scares the parents. And they love you for kind of enjoying it. I always say when people are really in that feeling and get it out, it sounds like Mozart to me. Yeah. You know? Because I really know that's going to help them. And that's beautiful. At the very end, dying children, and I'm thinking more of very younger dying children, become very withdrawn, almost sulky, and very like in another world. Try to remember that there is a preparatory grief, where any interference on your part, like talking to them, ask them, is there anything I can get to you? Is there anything I can do to you to see you smile? I want to see my Susie smile again. I don't want you so sad. You understand that this is again your inability to let go. Children go through a very moving preparatory grief where they, in psychiatric language you would call that, where they begin to decaffect. They begin to wean off. And they don't want the visitors anymore, and they don't even want the classmates to come. And they don't want you to come with a noisy toy and bribing them with their favorite television program. And you do anything to make them noisy. Do you understand that a bit? Not noisy, but say something, do something. Just don't lie there like you're dead already, is what you would love to say. You don't say that, but you'll do anything. You come with clowns, you come with noisy toys, with anything. And to me, to just be able to say, would you like to be left alone? And they say, mm-hmm. Or is it okay if I just hold you in my arms? And I promise I won't say anything until you say something. And to be able to tolerate that silence and to just hold them and love them and hug them, that to me is an incredible gift. That's what Jamie's mother was able to do in my book. What was it called? My photo book. To Live Until We Say Goodbye. She became Jamie's pillow. She even had the courage to be lazy and stay in bed. And she didn't worry about the dusty table. She just held her in her arms, and that's how she died. Okay. Any final question?
I have a 3-year-old son who appears to be very alive, and I would like to hear you say something about parenting and guiding children who are healthy and well.
You have a death in the family, don't hide it. Share everything with them. Take your dying grandma's home to die so that children can participate in it, can feed her, can play a music tape for her, can touch her, can hug her. That they experience that death does not have to be a nightmare, but a very beautiful shared experience. And if you don't have a relative, then do it with pets. When a pet dies, make a funeral, talk about it, and don't replace them immediately with another dog. because it's your anxiety. You prevent the children from going through a natural grief, and allow them to cry and allow them to be angry in a natural way so they don't end up as Hitlers 50 years later.
You say allow them to be angry. Is, say, like giving a 4-year-old a rubber hose, is that appropriate, or is that beyond?
If you have experienced it and you know how to do it, and you save one place in a house, like one specific mattress, and you say if you get real mad, talk to the mattress and let it out. And you can say mommy or dad or teacher or whoever this is, but you never hurt a human being. You let your mad out at the teacher or at me here on this mattress. And in this room, in this place, you can use any language you want. But once you step out, that language is not acceptable. And hitting is not acceptable, or kicking a dog is not acceptable. If you're mad at the dog, imagine him to be here and then hit him and tell him what he did was wrong. But then you can't go around and spank him the same evening. You understand? You have to have consistent, firm discipline. If you're a hitter and each time they say something you bash him, don't expect the child not to bash the dog and the brother and everybody else. You can only be a teacher by your living, not by your words. If you get mad, you have a phone that really makes you mad, you hang up the telephone, you say to your 4-year-old, I have to get my mad out. And you go into the same room and get it out, and it will be a very acceptable family way of dealing with overreactions.
Why do you say that anger lasts only 15 seconds after you say anything?
Natural anger in its natural state is enough time to say no, Mom. Or Jeffy, who was, doctor wants to give him an experimental chemotherapy. And this poor guy has gone through everything for 6 years and 9 years of his life. And he looked like he was near death. And this young doctor comes in and says, we're going to start another experimental chemotherapy. And you could see all over his face that he's just, oh, God, no. And I asked the parents in front of the new doctor, did anybody ask Jeffy? And they said, no. I said, ask him. Because if he's willing to participate, he's going to help, and it's going to be effective. But if he resents every part of it, he's going to fight and he's going to die miserable. And I asked him, with the parents' permission, and Jeffy looked at me and said, I don't understand you grown-ups, why you have to make us kids so sick to get as well. And I asked him, you really don't want it, even if it means that you might get the chance. And he looked at us, very disgusted, and he checked out everybody to see if they can take it. And then he said, no, thank you. Check your time. That takes about 15 seconds. And the parents were able to take him home. That, to me, is unconditional love. Not to listen first to your needs, but to be open enough to acknowledge your needs. But hear your child say no, thank you, and give him the grace of being able to be taken home and finish his unfinished business. He's the one who put the training wheels on a bicycle to go around the block. It's, to me, my most unforgettable experience in 20 years. Those parents would have never experienced the son to be able to finish his unfinished business if they had kept him in the hospital. And that takes, to me, the absolute ultimate of love is to hear a child say no, thank you. That takes the emotion of anger. Anger is not something ugly, it's what we make out of it is ugly. Anger, natural anger, is the beginning of inner authority and self-trust and self-worth and self-love. And if you give that to your children, they have very good basis for life. Thank you for being here. I appreciated your being a participant in this adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you.